Killer Innovations Podcast for Tuesday, December 13th, 2005. Show number 39. Coming to you from New York City. Hi, and welcome to the podcast. Before we get started, please keep in mind that the information and opinions expressed in this podcast are mine and mine alone, and do not necessarily reflect those of my past, current, or future employers. This show's going to be a little more chaotic, read casual. I'm actually doing these recordings as I'm bouncing back and forth between presentations. So I'm actually in the hotel, and to be quite honest, I don't even know what hotel am I in. The Sheraton in Manhattan, and I'm here doing a bunch of presentations. So in between presentations, I'm running up to the hotel room to record the podcast. I know I'm a couple days late. Travel's been a little bit crazy, but was hoping to get this out last night, but meetings and discussions went long as usual. So we're going to try to squeeze this, get the recordings done during the day here Tuesday, and then do final production and get it posted up Tuesday night. Okay? Thanks for all the votes. Visit podcastalley.com. If you haven't voted yet this month, keep in mind that the vote count gets set back to 0, and you're allowed to vote once per month for each of your favorite podcasts. And we really do appreciate the votes. And more importantly, I really do appreciate the comments that you post on Podcast Alley. Also, I've noticed that the discussions on the bulletin board at the KI community site have really picked up. I do appreciate that. I know a number of you have stepped up to really kick off and sponsor some of the discussions that are going on. And I think there's some great thinking that's going on the site. So feel free to join in. If you haven't visited the KI community site, the easiest way to connect is just go to killerinnovations.com. and click on the KI community button, which is on the upper right-hand side of the screen. It's buried in the middle of all those other buttons up there, so it may be a little hard to read, but it's the KI community button. Click on that, it'll take you directly to the site, and you can participate in the discussions. Also, keep in mind that voting is still open for the Killer Innovations logo. Now, I call it a logo, and I've been chastised by some of our listeners who are more in the graphic artist space than I am, that it's really not a logo, but I'll continue to use the logo term. But it's a new graphical image that we will be using for the cover art in iTunes on other sites for Killer Innovations. So please go out and vote. The flaming red version is winning the vote count tally so far. So get in there and vote and let me know what you're thinking. Let's see. Please continue to send the feedback. You can send feedback by dropping me an email at podcast@killerinnovations.com. You can also call the feedback line at 703-636-4460, or you can Skype me at Phil_McKinney. Also, for audio feedback, feel free. You can record just an MP3 file on your PC and send that to me as an attachment, and we'll also play it. Please keep the audio feedback to something, in the 3 to 5 minute range, and then we'll play it in an upcoming show. And your comments can be anything of criticisms, recommendations for the show, topics that are of interest to you, or sharing with all the listeners about how you're applying innovation to your personal life, to your career, to your family, and as part of the Pay It Forward strategy. Okay? With that, I've actually wanted to talk a little bit about an article that I read this last couple of weeks. It was a special feature that was in, I think, Fortune. Is that right? Yes, it was Fortune. It's the Fortune issue that has Andy Grove on the front cover. So it's December 12th issue of Fortune. And there's a special insert in this issue of Fortune. If you haven't seen it, I suggest that you pick it up. I know the international versions are slightly different, particularly given this is classified as an advertising feature, which means it's a sponsored section by some big companies, Toyota and others. And the title of it is The Spirit of Innovation. Now, in this article, they actually have an interview called Unraveling the Mysteries of Innovation. And the interview is with Ralph Katz. He's the professor of entrepreneurship and innovation at Northeastern University's College of Business. And also Tom Kelly, general manager of design firm IDEO. Now, those of you who've been longtime listeners know that I'm a big Tom Kelly fan. And then Deborah Wynn Smith, who's president of the Council on Competitiveness, which is a group of companies and industries that look at how do you measure and how do you encourage competitiveness. Now, in this section, and there's a whole bunch of, typical interview kind of, fairly mundane kind of questions. But they have this chart, which when I flipped to it, just kind of knocked me over, because it's really the first time I've ever seen this quantified. So the question is what is fueling productivity gains? Now, they don't quite qualify, over what time frame and whether this is geography based. And I haven't had time to go out onto the website and look at how the statistics were pulled together. But so the question is, what is fueling productivity gains? Now, it has things in here like outsourcing. So they're saying 11% of the productivity gains in the economy is coming from outsourcing, 12% from staff downsizing, 14% from capital improvement, and 8% is classified as other. Now that leaves 42%. And in this study, they say 42% of the productivity gain in the economy comes from innovation. Now, again, I don't have a way to quantify this. I've seen other studies where people have done analysis on if I do straight capital of investment, buying new equipment, get better utilization of my assets that I have on my books, I can get X percentage of improvement. But if I take that same amount of money and invest it in creating an innovation process within my organization, I can have upwards of 3, 4, 5X improvement in the productivity of my business. So in this case, we now have a hard fact number that says 42% of the productivity gains in the economy comes from innovation. Again, I don't have a definition for how they describe innovation, but again, kind of an interesting statistic. As part of as part of the interview process here, there's one thing that kind of caught my eye, and the question was talking about the issue of innovation and the role of it in education. And I've said in the past that I think the current educational system, particularly here in the U.S., does not teach people really how to be creative, or how to come up with new ideas, or how to think differently. We kind of force this, this confirmation, or I shouldn't say confirmation, conforming to a society expectation for how people, should fit into society. So the question that the moderator is really talking about is how important is education for this whole process of teaching innovation and creativity. And Wynn Smith responds, and this is just a quote, "It's necessary bedrock, but it's not the only answer. I recently asked some colleagues in Japan whether all of these brilliant video game animators came out of the elite educational environments. Turns out virtually all of them are totally untrained and outside of the system." So you think about it, the animators in Japan who are working on kind of the breakthrough games, doing these very, creative animated, TV shows and movies, etc., are untrained. People who completely have come at it from a completely different direction to create something and create literally an entire economy. If you've ever been into the bookstores and you see all the new Japanese animation books, etc., and here it is that virtually all of them totally untrained and outside of the system. Now Kelly responds that says, and this is a quote, "At IDEO, we talk about P-shaped people with great depth in one area, but also breadth to think broadly about other disciplines. We need to encourage whole brain thinking rather than the narrow analytical approach that is so popular in business schools today." And then Katz replies to the same question that's in the quote here is, deep down, innovation comes from the diversity of knowledge. The more educated the population, the more innovative the people become. They will also become more demanding of innovation and more willing to use animations. Now the moderator goes on and asks Kelly another follow-up question. Are children being properly prepared in our elementary and secondary schools? Now, for those of you who've been listeners, you know my passion, about the educational systems and how we could significantly improve them, not only in the U.S., but in other parts of the world. And so Kelly's response, I just love this. And I'm going to read it. It's about 2 paragraphs long, so stick with it here. But you got to hear Kelly's response. My favorite book about organizational creativity is Gordon McKenzie's Orbiting the Giant Hairball, A Corporate Fool's Guide to Surviving the Grace, which is a cult classic that focuses on what your organization should not be. A fixed system of rules and processes based on what worked in the past. In the first story in the book, McKenzie presents to the youngest kids in school, the kindergartners, and asks if anybody in the class is an artist. Everybody raises their hand. Everybody in kindergarten is an artist. Then he presents to the first graders, the second graders, and so on. At the end of the day, he presented to his 6th graders, and only 2 kids raised their hands, and they're kind of looking around sheepishly for fear of how people are going to judge them. McKenzie says, hey, what happened here? Did all of the art students transfer to other schools? Then he says, I don't think so. I think someone or something convinced you it's not okay to be an artist. And to be quite honest, I think that's where a lot of people get caught up in the whole trap of creativity and innovation. I'll go into an audience and I'll ask people, how many people in the room truly think of themselves as being creative? And you'll get maybe 10% of the audience will raise their hands. And again, they're looking around sheepishly. But I think the model here, or the example that McKenzie gives that says, in kindergarten, everybody's an artist and everybody's creative. But we then beat down upon the people that you're not creative or you're not innovative, you got to be analytic, you can't be this wild thing, you got to conform, you got to operate in a certain way. And it doesn't stop in secondary schools. We see it all the time in colleges, where the colleges try to get everybody to conform and think a certain way. Some of the leading business schools are either, are case study based, scenario based, whatever the teaching method is. And it's teaching every kid or every student in that college program to think along those means when trying to drive decisions in the business, versus allowing for a diversity of thought, a diversity of approaches in order to be more creative and to drive this innovation value. And if you truly believe that 42% of the productivity gains in the economy come from innovation, we should literally throw the book out on how we teach and train people on how to be creative and how to be innovative in order for all of our economies to have that kind of a positive impact. There's no single item that can have a larger impact on that business other than innovation. Yet, we have no formal recognition in the educational systems on how to train and how to encourage people to be more innovative. Now, part of what I'm trying to do here with this podcast is to share with you just my opinion. There's lots of approaches on creativity. Using killer questions and going after that approach is not the only way. And there's lots of really great books, and I'm actually trying to collect an entire list of the best books on creativity that I've read and publish them as one list rather than giving them to you one at a time in the podcast. I've gotten a lot of emails asking for book recommendations for buying for the holiday season, buying this Christmas presents coming up here. So, and I've replied to those emails, one-on-one, based on people's questions. And I'm going to try to consolidate a list up of some of the best books. So the Killer Innovations approach is not, the best approach in order to, to try to respond or try to support the the approach to creativity or the approach to innovation. So I would encourage, or I guess the question I'm going to propose out to all the listeners is what could be done to change the educational system in order to create a better environment for our children, our children's children, to recognize the impact and the importance of innovation in all of our economies. This is not a U.S.-centric view. As many of you know, I've talked about this in the past, but the listener base for this podcast is truly global. I have South America. I have a very large listener base in Australia and New Zealand. I don't know who is in Australia and New Zealand promoting the podcast, but whoever you are, you're doing a heck of a job, because I have a huge amount of listeners from Australia, New Zealand, UK, Africa, Middle East, Eastern Europe, and of course a lot in the US. But, my view here is that all of our economies can be so significantly impacted if we rethink the process of how do we train our students and our children to recognize the creative power that all of us have. You've heard me say this again in the past. Creativity is not a gift. It's not like a gift from God that just, you happen to be bestowed on you, that you're creative and the person next to you is not creative. We are all empowered with creativity and the ability to be creative. We've just been untrained over the years that creativity may not be a good thing, conforming to standard thinking, whether that's societal, depending on where we live in the world, or bestowed on us organizationally. Operate this way in the business and your career will be successful. Just as, the point made here about the Japanese artist, the leading animators in Japan did not come from the best schools. They came completely from outside the system, and they came in completely untrained. These were individuals who did not let themselves get formed, didn't let their thinking get formed by others. They left themselves to be, more creative as far as the overall approach to their business. So again, if you haven't seen this, it's in the Fortune magazine issue. Again, it's the one with, at least the version of the magazine that I have in my hand here. It's the December 12th, 2005 issue. It's got Andy Grove on the middle. And the title on the page is Tools for Success, How to Become a Great Leader. And it's interviews with Andy Grove at Intel and Scott Cook at Intuit, the inventors or the creators of the Quicken personal financial software pieces. Okay? Another part of this document or survey, or I should say survey, it's really this insert that was in the Fortune magazine. They had a thing in the back of the magazine that talks about the 10 ways to manage inspiration. Now, these are not my thoughts. This is what was put together as part of this insert in Fortune magazine. I'm just going to read through these and I'm going to comment on them. So, number one, these are 10 items, again, 10 ways to manage inspiration. So, number one, brainstorm the problem without any bounds. This brings out the best in people and allows participants with different backgrounds to work together. Encourage shy members of the group to contribute by asking them questions when the discussion hits a lull. Well, this gets into the whole issue of how do you run a brainstorming session. We've talked about this in the past. Number two, don't get sidetracked. Once an idea comes into focus, stick with it. There are thousands of reasons not to proceed with an idea, and only one that will get it done. Now, in this case, it is easy to get sidetracked, and many organizations do suffer from the challenges of being distracted from the standpoint of actually seeing an idea through to some kind of success. It's easy to get discouraged. If you got to have the passion to follow it through. Number three, collaborate. The lone misunderstood inventor is a myth. Most innovations occur in groups, and I'm a firm believer of this. You may come up with raw ideas, but you need to have this diversity of thinking in order to really drive it to success. 4, never leave well enough alone. Innovation is based on striving for continual improvements. As soon as you decide something is good enough, someone will do it better. So this is the issue of, is it good enough to ship? Is it good enough to satisfy the current demands? The question is can you go from a good idea to a killer idea by pushing a little bit further? 5, look outside. Can't get it together? Hire an outside expert. Often a fresh viewpoint is all that's needed to get a project back on track. Now, albeit I used to make my living as a consultant, I'm also not a big fan that outside experts are always the solution. So in this case, I would actually be a little bit hesitant about automatically falling back. Sometimes consultants can be extremely helpful. Consultants to help you create an innovative culture. If you don't have the skill sets to create these innovation pipeline teams within your organization, can be extremely helpful. But don't automatically assume that a consultant is going to come in here and fix all your problems. 6, encourage an innovative climate at work. A workplace that squashes fresh thinking is stuck in the past. You don't want to be the last manufacturer of the world's most perfect buggy whip. Well, this gets into the whole issue of how do you create an innovative culture. We've talked about this on some of the podcasts in the past, and actually I'm working on a more in-depth podcast in the future on organizational creativity. But again, you've got to have an environment that encourages that kind of risk-taking. 7, separate the wheat from the chaff. Much as we'd like to think so, every idea does not have the makings of the next Starbucks, iPod, or Post-it note. Most ideas are so off base or inappropriate, it's important to quickly put them aside and focus on the good ones. But keep good notes because times and tastes change. Now, in this case, I would somewhat disagree with number 7 because, in my view, some of the best ideas are the ones that people really did think were wacky. Why would you ever do that? Why would you ever create that thing? And then it's really this unhidden demand. I mean, it's the whole story of IBM creating the first mainframe computer. The market study said that they would only sell 4. I just saw a video done on the life and history of the founders of Hewlett Packard, Dave and Bill. And if you're not familiar, HP was the first one to create the pocket calculator. And the study goes is that Dave and Bill were firm believers of it. Some employees viewed that it was not going to be successful given that it was going to cost $400 versus how much a cost of a slide rule was. But the founders went ahead and said, no, we believe that this is going to be successful. And the point was is that they wanted one for their own use. And when they came out with it, it basically, it was kind of the iPod of the day. You literally waited in line in stores in order to get an HP pocket calculator. But here's a case where it isn't just the fact that you couldn't prove that it was going to be successful. In many cases, people thought it was a crazy idea. So don't come to the conclusion that you alone, or even people within your organization know more than you know. This is a case where it's a gut check and it's passion for your idea to see that through. Number 8, make a sketch or model of your idea. It'll be crude and will take imagination to visualize, but a tangible representation of a new concept not only shows what's possible, but also what needs to be worked on. Well, this is the whole concept behind fast prototyping versus rapid prototyping. If you haven't listened to that podcast, you can go to the Killer Innovation site, look down on the right-hand side, and select on the podcast where we talk about fast prototyping and what the benefit of the organization is. Number 9, don't hammer down the nail that sticks out. Oddballs are the lifeblood of innovation and the source of many of the best ideas. Respect diverse reviews and reward forward thinking, even if it doesn't result in a product right away. Again, this is one that I would wholeheartedly support. You got to have some of those people in your organization that kind of rub you the wrong way. I mean, I've had people in my organizations over time that other managers didn't want, and I would take them into my organization. And what I've found is these are the people that can be a little annoying. They hang around your desk maybe a little bit too long. They may see things that you kind of think initially of, being maybe a little inappropriate or, contrarian to the way the organization is going as far as direction. But don't automatically try to drum those people out of your organization. These are some of these people could be that source of that next idea that's really going to make the change. And number 10, try everything. Leave no stone unturned and be sure to have patience. Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither will your innovation. It will take hard work, late hours, and countless cold pizzas, but it will be the effort. And again, this is the Edison effect of him trying to find how many elements was it going to take before the light bulb could eventually be invented. Years and years and years and thousands of experiments to finally find the one element that led to the invention of the incandescent light bulb. So again, try everything. Okay? With that, let's move on to the killer question of the week. This week's killer question is kind of tied into the theme that we've had in the previous one, where we talked about what innovations would make your job obsolete. So this week's killer question is what new job category will exist in the future that doesn't exist today? What new job category will exist in the future that doesn't exist today? Now, we can all look back to, job categories that flat out did not exist, some time ago. Such things as, computer animators, never existed. Albeit when I was in college, my focus was on computer animation systems. But when I graduated, there was no such thing as a computer animator, albeit I wrote software for computer animation. Who was the user? The user didn't exist at that point in time. Before the invention of airplane pilots, there's a whole set of jobs that are created as a result of innovation. So the question is can you sit back, look at the trends, and look and identify for entirely new job categories that will exist in the future, a job that's going to be needed in the future, but that does not exist today. And in that case, what skills would be needed for that job, and how could people today prepare to fill that role when it's needed? So again, this week's killer question is, what new job category will exist in the future that doesn't exist today? And with that, we're going to wrap up. I apologize. I know this particular show has kind of been bouncing around, and you probably have heard a couple of clicks and pops as we stopped and started the recording. Again, I apologize because I'm doing these segments as I'm running back and forth to from the presentations that I'm giving downstairs. So again, I apologize. Hope this isn't too disconnected. Be interested in hearing your feedback. So with that, thanks for listening. Remember to vote. Voting on Podcast Alley, voting at Yahoo, voting at the sites that you visit where you've learned about the killer innovations is the best way for you to say thanks for the time and effort that your favorite podcast producers put into the effort of producing the podcast that you listen to. Keep the feedback coming. Email at podcast@killerinnovations.com. You can always call the feedback line at 703-636-4460. Or you can always Skype me at Phil_McKinney. If you have audio feedback, send it to me as an email. You can just record it as an MP3. So just stick a microphone into the microphone jack on your PC. Don't worry about the quality. I'm just interested in hearing the feedback. And if you share it with me in an audio form, then I will play that in an upcoming podcast. Thanks for all the support, the emails, the encouragement, the participation on the KI community site. I really do appreciate it. And remember, the only thing that I ask is that you take the information that's being shared in this podcast, use it yourself, but also pay it forward. Let other people know about the podcast. Share what you've learned here, share what you've learned in other places. But really, the objective, my objective here is to pay it forward for the investment that my mentors have invested in me, and I ask that you just pay it forward also. So thanks for listening. Get subscribed. Get others to subscribe, and we'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.